Just a little after 7, and it looks like we might have a quorum. Shall we call the roll? And oh, by the way, Aaron is not able to join us. He had to be away for work, and Todd is not feeling well, so he won't be joining us either.
Maria Ryan.
Here?
Gary Zico. Here. John Marlin. Rachel Valenga. Stephen Wald.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum, so let's get going. I just want to start by welcoming Rachel. We've met you already because you've been to our last couple of meetings, but it's very nice to have you on this side of the table. And I don't know how many folks here know very much about Rachel. I know what was on your application, that you've been in Urbana for about 13 years and work as a children's librarian over at the Urbana Free Library and are on the board of the local Sierra Club chapter. Served as a director of your campus recycling program when you were at Northern up in DeKalb. And you're on the environmental committee in DeKalb, so you probably have at least some idea of what you've gotten yourself into. And I don't know if you have any other things you want to tell us about yourself. All right, do we have any changes to the agenda tonight? All right, let's move on to the approval of the minutes from our previous meeting. Do we have a motion?
I so move. I will second that.
Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed? Those are approved.
I'm Carol McCusick, and I'm at 403 West University. I'm going to interrupt the questions and answers email that I was reading from beginning October 11th, Sustainability Advisory Commission public comment. I'd like to start by giving Bart some questions, but then I'd like to resume saying some stuff for the rest of my 5 minutes before I got his answers. So one question was, what is the schedule for the production of the education materials that go with the hauler bill that was passed by City Council on July 18th? Question 2, what is the schedule for the production of the materials going to the haulers that show what they report? And I guess they'll start having to submit the reports at, what year is that on? Is it on a calendar year or a fiscal year that they send in those reports? Either way, they wouldn't have a whole year of experience to be reporting until, okay. I'm asking about that. Now there's a third question which is slipping my mind, so I'm going to go on to telling, now those two questions actually, if people want to look up, they have to do with the hauler bill, with an agenda material that is on the city webpage for July 11th, with something like licensed and hauler, chapter 10 in the name of it. It's, if you want to look at at what this whole matter is about, that's where you'd find it. So I'm switching to a different matter that's been passed by City Council even more recently, though. This is a waste container bill that was passed on December 5th, yesterday. And the material for that could be found on the city meeting webpage for December 5th. And it's the words waste container are in it. And it was passed by the council, and I started to try to bring up to council, and my public comment time ran out, that it accomplishes maybe some improvements on nuisance issues associated with overflowing dumpsters, but it doesn't necessarily accomplish anything around protecting groundwater because of the style of the dumpster trucks coming in. They put their fork arms in and they dump the contents, and it kind of like rains down around the cab. I've seen this twice now, and so while this new waste can law makes businesses have watertight dumpsters, which may in fact mean that they have to replace their dumpsters, their current dumpsters, because not all, Bart says not all dumpsters are watertight. They be prepared for me to ask for extra 5 minutes or extra time as well. So if, since it's a law and the city does enforce its laws, at least if you make a complaint about it, the businesses will be replacing the dumpsters that they currently have if they aren't the watertight type.
At the 5-minute mark.
It's finished.
Is there a motion to allow extra time for the speaker? Are there any questions or comments for the speaker? Okay, thank you.
And then,
Okay, our next item, we have communications and a presentation on the Stormwater Utility Credit and Incentive Program from Brad Bennett from Public Works.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak before you this evening. I'll give you a little background. I had previously come and given the committee a presentation on the stormwater utility feasibility study back when we were kind of in the preliminary phase of it, and I'm proud to report that the council was interested in pursuing the stormwater utility fee. On October 10th, they authorized us to proceed with two components of the process. One was developing the draft rate ordinance, which is what would actually adopt the stormwater utility fee. The other was to come up with a more detailed information on the credit and incentive policy portion of that. We've had our consultant, AMEC, who's got offices in Indianapolis and Chicago, and they're kind of national experts on setting up stormwater utilities. They've done hundreds of these, and they've prepared a draft report for us, which I think Bart emailed out to everybody on the committee. What I'm here tonight is to kind of present you with what their recommendations for a credit and incentive program are, and solicit some feedback from the Sustainability Commission on what your thoughts on it, if there's additional credits and incentives you think we need to add, if the dollar amounts are right, just your thoughts and ideas on it. Our plan is to take your comments and revisions along with our internal staff review of it, and either in January or February, when we've got all those incorporated, then make a presentation to the council and get their input on it as well. So with that, I'll kind of jump into the presentation. If you have any questions or concerns at any point in the presentation, you don't have to wait to the end. Feel free if you want to jump in with a question. And I'll point out, too, kind of what we were thinking of doing is if you could route any comments and questions and stuff through Bart, and then Bart will forward those on to me. I'll be glad to answer any questions if you think of something after tonight's presentation. I think what we talked about is maybe trying to get the advisory committee's input back by the next meeting in January, kind of set that for maybe a target deadline, if that would be agreeable. But with that, I'll jump into the presentation here. First, talk a little bit what are credit and incentives, and like I said, this is all related to the concept of charging a stormwater fee for all properties in Urbana. A stormwater user credit is a reduction in the amount of fee charged. So usually it's a percentage reduction, 20%, 10%, for having on-site stormwater management. This is different from, city, green infrastructure or, best management practices that would be installed in the right-of-way. This would actually be on private property, not within that city right-of-way. And to give you a little idea of why communities typically have credit and incentive programs, and particularly credit programs, it acknowledges that on-site stormwater management can reduce the city's operational costs by keeping the water out of the stormwater system. Obviously, that reduces the amount of cleaning and repair and maintenance that we have to do on the pipes. Reduces our compliance costs. We're regulated by the state to do certain measures to try to improve our water quality, reduce water pollution. So by keeping that pollution out of the system, that reduces our compliance costs. And like I mentioned kind of earlier, it does reduce our capital cost if we can have on-site stormwater management. It might reduce the need to upsize pipes to be able to carry the higher flows that we're seeing off the dense impervious areas. How do credits work? It's a direct reduction in user fees. It's applied after the user fees are calculated, so they calculate the amount of impervious area for a property, determine the bill, and if a property qualifies for a credit, then there would be a certain deduction off their bill for that. It's ongoing. We're planning on a monthly or bi-monthly billing process, so every billing cycle that credit would be applied. We're looking at a maximum limit of 50%, where properties will be able to get potentially multiple credits and add them up to a maximum of 50%. We're looking at it not being available to single-family properties or duplex properties. These would be for the more business, larger type properties. And the reason for this is there's a certain amount of staff effort that has to go into tracking credits. We have to verify that they were installed correctly. We have to verify on a certain frequency that they're being continued to be operated in order to ensure that they're getting that credit. So there's a significant amount that goes along with having a credit program, whereas with an incentive program, which is what we're going to look at for residential areas, it's a one-time payment. You install a rain garden on your property, you get a lump sum money of the city, and the city doesn't really have to follow or track through long-term like they do with credits. So because we have so many residential properties, it makes sense to offer them an incentive program, which doesn't require as much staff time. And kind of the final bullet on here, credits must be applied for by the property owner. If the council votes to move into the actual rate ordinance adoption, we would actually develop a real detailed manual that would have all the details as far as what qualifies for a credit and how credits are calculated and what the application process is. And those would be details that would be developed later. Talk a little bit next about incentives. This would be applicable to residential properties. An incentive is a one-time payment. The advantage of this for the small payers too is, a credit of 10% a month if you're only, or 10% credit if you're only paying $60 a year. As a stormwater utility fee only, amounts to $6 a year. So it's not a lot of money at one time in order to adopt on-site stormwater management. One-time disbursement has a tendency to have more impact because there's more money involved. But we're looking at, a $300 maximum limit. It compensates the property owner for partnering with the city to adopt on-site stormwater management. It would operate on a first-come, first-served basis. There would be a pool of money available. As people applied for it and were awarded it, we would keep going till the funds were exhausted. The next fiscal year, new funds would be available, and we would move through the next on the priority application list. It would be available to all properties. And once again, it would be something that would have to be applied for, whether it's a rain barrel rebate that you would apply for at the time of the sale, or a rain garden reimbursement or pervious pavement reimbursement. For the residential properties, there would still be an application that they would have to fill out, and the city would still verify at least the initial installation of it. There wouldn't be quite as many hoops as there would be with a credit policy. I'd give some examples of what we came up with for the Urbana Credit and Incentive Program. You can see it's broken into two columns. One is single-family and duplex properties. The other is, basically all the other properties, the more commercial, industrial, larger properties. But for rain barrels, available to both classes would be a $25 incentive. For rain garden, a $250 incentive. And then sticking with the incentive side, for rate reduction, volume reduction, or water quality measures adopted on site on those properties, they'd be able to get up to a $250 incentive payment. When you move to the other properties, you can see when we switch over to the rate reduction, volume reduction, and water quality, those become, percent reductions in their bill. And point out, we do offer a credit for properties that discharge directly, to water bodies not maintained by the city. For example, the saline is probably the largest one we have here in Urbana, to recognize that they're not passing through any city infrastructure as they outlet their stormwater. And we are looking at having a incentive for, hopefully the school district to educate the kids about stormwater quality and what they can do for pollution prevention, and we'll be offering a incentive for the schools to teach that in their coursework. Since we're always compared to Champaign, I wanted to show what Champaign's credit and incentive program. You see it's very similar to ours. Our percentages are just a little bit higher on some of the rate reduction and volume reduction. You can see, particularly for the rain barrel and rain garden, we match what they have for the most part. They do offer a private detention basin maintenance credit for subdivisions and other property owners that maintain private detention basins. We are not at this time proposing to offer that.
I did have a question at this point. With the reference to NPDES and isn't there a compliance requirement? I mean, what about NPDES are they trying to incentivize here or, reward here?
Well, if certain industries are required to have their own stormwater NPDES permit, particularly the larger ones for their, usually it is applicable for industrial sites.
Okay.
So what they're offering, I point out we're not offering this incentive in Champaign, or in Urbana, I'm sorry. Champaign is offering an incentive for those properties that have to have a NPDES permit required by the state, a discount to recognize, their stormwater efforts as part of that permit. But I would point out that's a state requirement that the state requires you to do, so I'm not quite sure why you're...
Yeah, that's kind of what I was puzzled by.
Okay. And we're not. Right now, our current proposal doesn't include a credit for that. And what we'll go through next is just kind of some more detail of how these different credit and incentive programs would break down and what are some more details regarding them. For example, rain barrels. And this is a program we already currently have. And maybe Bart could comment at this point what kind of participation we typically see with this. But this is a program we have. We would look at, shifting the funding over to the stormwater utility. I think right now it's funded off the recycling fee.
Yeah, right now with the program we have pretty low participation. I think part of that's due to lack of the word being out there. I think we need more education on it. So yeah, currently participation very low, although we did have the truckload sale last spring, which had very high participation. We sold over 500 rain barrels in one day. So I think there's a need out there. There's a desire for people to have them. I think it's just a matter of getting them the right information and hooking them up with the programs that we have in place or will develop through the utility.
Cool. Thank you, Bart. What we're looking at is a rebate of $25 per rain barrel. There would be a limit of 2 barrels per property. These kind of match the rules of the existing program. It has to be purchased at a pre-approved supplier in the city, and the rebate is at the time of the purchase. Moving to incentive or rain gardens, and this would be applicable for both residential and non-residential properties. There would be a reimbursement of $250. We require a minimum rain garden size of 100 square feet. The city would have to review and approve the design, and we would have to verify that it was installed. We would not inspect it after that, but in order to receive the reimbursement of $250, the city would have to come out and verify that the rain garden was constructed in accordance to its approved plan. Moving on to some other incentives, and these fall into those, volume, rate, and water quality categories. And this would be for residential properties. For cisterns, the city would reimburse 25% of the cost of installing a cistern, up to $250 for the city share. Once again, the property owner would have to submit a design showing the city what they were proposing to do, and we would have to verify the installation. Looking at pervious pavement, we would have a program where we would reimburse 25% of the cost, up to a maximum amount of $250. The design, once again, would have to be approved by the city, as well as installation. And looking at green roofs, and once again, this would be for residential properties, the city would reimburse 25% of the cost, up to a maximum of $250. Once again, city has to review all these and verify the installation. And I'll point out for the residential, remember there's a $300 cap. So, you could pick, to put in 2 rain barrels and put in porous pavement and receive that $250 reimbursement for the pervious pavement, and that would be your $300. You couldn't, install pervious pavement and a green roof and, a rain garden and capture, the whole $750.
So is that cap per year, or is that a cap for all time?
It would probably be a cap for all time.
And it would go with the property or with the individual. So like if I lived in one house and put in pervious pavement,
Since
got my
the
$250
fees are assessed on the property, I would assume it would be tied to
go
the
with
property.
Okay.
And then moving into the credit policies, the first one we're going to look at is runoff rate reduction. And this would be up to a 20% credit. What this has to do with is reducing the runoff rate, the amount of water that runs off the site. There's 2 ways to do this. The first is, and we've seen this, standard in place for a number of years, the city actually requires on new subdivision development that they build a detention basin. And the idea behind a detention basin is you don't reduce the total amount of runoff off the site, but you reduce the rate. You spread that volume of water being released over a longer period of time. Like I said, we currently have a standard. We only allow for new development them to release a 5-year pre-development storm off the site, through the storm sewer system or, through creeks or channels. They would have to provide a reduction below the 5-year pre-development storm standard in order to get that credit. The other way that you can reduce the runoff rate off the site is through some of the best management practices like pervious pavement, bioswales. It's possible through some of the other infiltration basins and stuff where you can actually reduce, that peak rate coming off because you're infiltrating it into the ground. And kind of on the other end of it, too, is the city requires, in these detention basins that they hold up to the 50-year design storm. And obviously, if someone wanted to over-design, add extra volume to their pond to hold water above that 50-year design storm, and this has to more do with flooding than water quality, there would be a credit for that because they're holding back more water from those peak storms than what would be required by the city standards. Looking at runoff rate reduction, when you can also talk about pervious pavement. In this case, the water infiltrates down through the pavement. Usually it's stored in a rock bed underneath the pavement and is released as a slow rate. Typically pervious pavement has an underdrain system that's connected to the storm sewer, but as the water kind of slowly moves through that rock base, you will get a little bit of infiltration, but it'll just slow it down and reduce that rate. So you might not see a lot of volume reduction, but you'll see a rate reduction that would be eligible for a credit. Looking at once again, runoff rate reductions, bioretention systems, bioswales, rain gardens would also be eligible for that 20% credit. Once again, they're slowing down that water coming off the site. And if you're getting a rate reduction for any of these systems, you can include an underdrain system. You can design typically a bioswale or rain garden with an underdrain system or without. Underdrain system, that water will eventually drain through the pipe. If you don't put an underdrain system in it, you force it to all have to infiltrate or percolate into the ground. Next category we're going to move into is volume reduction. This will be actually reducing the total volume of stormwater off the site. This is why a detention basin would not qualify for this credit, because it's the same amount of water, it's just a slowed down rate. Cisterns and rain barrels would qualify for the volume reduction. You're capturing that stormwater on site and using it for another purpose, whether it's irrigation or some other use. That's water that's not making it to the city storm sewer system, so it's considered a volume reduction. Bioretention would also be available for, for a credit. I guess one thing I would point out, for the bioretention system to be eligible for a credit, it would have to be designed without a underdrain system, which is what this bioswale is designing. You see on this one, the bioswale will fill with water till it probably gets about 6 inches deep, and then it'll overflow at that point into the city storm sewer system. So in that type of system, you're actually forcing the water to infiltrate, till you get 6 inches of hydrostatic head on, and at that point it overflows. Whereas the underdrain system, you're getting more of a filtering action. Green roofs would also be eligible for a volume reduction. Obviously, a certain amount of that water will be taken up by the vegetation and the media on the roof. Looking at water quality credits, this is a 10% credit that's available, and this can be added on top of the other credits. So a real ambitious property regarding stormwater management, meaning you might be able to get the volume reduction, the rate reduction, and the water quality credit and capture that full 50%. The standard we'd be looking for when it came to water quality credits would be a 75% reduction in total suspended solids. A lot of water quality is related to total suspended solids. Obviously, the dirt that you see. If any of you have been out and ever seen the Boneyard Creek during a storm, it looks like the color of weak coffee. It loses its nice clear, being able to see to the bottom of it. A lot of that has to do with the sediment or total suspended solids that's being transported through it. A lot of the pollutants attach themselves, the heavy metals, the pesticides, the phosphorus all attach themselves to the sediment. So if you can reduce sediment, you also reduce the number of those pollutants. The one exception to that is nitrogen. Nitrogen is usually in an aqueous phase, so that one, if you reduce the total suspended solids, you usually don't see much of a reduction in the nitrogen necessarily. And it would be prorated based on the fraction of impervious area you treated. So, if you treated half the runoff coming off the site, with some water quality on-site stormwater management efforts, you would get, maybe 5% of the credit because you're only treating 50% of the site. And direct discharge, we mentioned this one earlier. This is for properties that discharge directly to non-city maintained infrastructure or creeks, which here, there's only two here in the city of Urbana. There's the Saline, which is actually maintained by the Saline Drainage District, and McCullough Creek. McCullough Creek, for those that aren't familiar, that's down by Meadowbrook Park. And the caveat with that would be that the discharges off the property cannot re-enter the city sewer systems or city-maintained creeks. Talk a little bit about the dollar amounts, and this was per council directive. We'll be collecting about $1.7 million in stormwater utility fees is what we're anticipating. Approximately $83,500, which amounts to about 5% of the collected revenues, is budgeted annually for the credits and incentives program. How that breaks down is there'll be about $20,000 available for the single family and duplex incentives. So that would be your rain barrels, your rain gardens, the rate reduction, the volume reduction, and the water quality measures they adopt on residential properties. About $12,000 will be available for non-single family incentives, and once again, that would be the rain barrels and the rain gardens for non-residential properties. And then 51,500 is available for the credits, and that would be, the 20% for the rate reduction credit, the 20% for the volume reduction credit, and the 10% available for the water quality, as well as that 50% direct discharge and the educational credit that's available for having an educational program about stormwater.
If you could clarify again, when you're talking about a credit, isn't that a credit that goes to the property and reduces their fee by a certain percentage?
Yes.
So why do you have like $50,000 in there?
Well, that's the account for the reduction in fees. With the credit incentive program, we won't collect the full 1.7 because of that. You'll essentially be reducing the amount of money that you're collecting. And that's what the 51,000 is. That is the reduction in revenues that we would anticipate by having the credit program.
But-
So it'll be less money we received.
But you've got if you have a percentage reduction that lasts essentially forever, your 50,000 is coming out of 1 year's revenue, right? And then there's another 50,000 the next year.
Mm-hmm.
So how is that? That's a finite amount of money that's being used for credits, but the credits go on forever.
That is correct. As long as they're
So
maintained.
it doesn't make any sense to me.
And it is, I think what you're saying, it's possible you could exhaust the credit, and that is a possibility. If that occurred, we'd have to essentially rebudget and, shift money around within the stormwater utility fee budget to be able to accommodate. Incentives, you go to exhaust the amount of money that's available with incentives.
Right,
But
that-
you're correct. In credits, if someone qualifies for a credit, you have to give them that reduction.
Forever.
Yeah. As long as they
So
maintain the
50,000 or whatever it is almost irrelevant.
But this is what you're anticipating per year, correct?
Yes.
So it would be recurring. So every year they're taking 50,000 out to.
Yeah, but once you accumulated that level of incentive, you carry it each year for that amount. There wouldn't be
Counting on just a stable number of participants all, throughout the
No,
lifetime
they
of it?
projected some growth in the number
Okay.
of credit incentives.
And
I'm
then
just showing
kind
you
of
a
averaged it.
snapshot from the first year.
Okay.
And like I said, it's possible that you could have enough people qualify for credits where you would exceed the amount that you have budgeted. And like I said, you'd have to shift money internally within the program to be able to accommodate that. I'll point out that our consultants' experience with this with other communities is they have very poor participation in the credit programs. So he's not aware of any communities where they've ever actually exhausted what they had budgeted for the credit program.
Can you explain a little bit more the relationship between the credit and the incentive amounts and the city's costs? Is it? I'm just curious for my own education how.
I don't know if
relationship
there's
is.
actually an indirect or a direct correlation where a rain barrel actually results in $25 worth of city. This is kind of a way to incentivize on-site stormwater management, which is something that the city desires to encourage that type of behavior. But, I'm not aware of any direct correlation. It'd be hard to prove that we were actually getting $25, benefit or $250 benefit from a rain garden directly.
Well, and overall, do you think you're getting something like 5% benefit on an overall basis, or something approaching it to justify 5% of the revenues? Or I'm just sort of curious how it works, or if in fact the 5% number is because kind of limit the damage to 5%.
Well, I think there is a, and I mentioned this in an earlier slide. There is gains that the city, gets from people having on-site stormwater management. It's hard to nail it with a, precise, exact economic cost. And in a lot of cases, with a lot of these measures, you still have to have the stormwater infrastructure in place, because particularly a lot of these measures, they'll handle that first, that 1 year storm, the first inch of rainfall that falls on the property you can infiltrate, and treat. But, you know, for the higher design storms, like our storm sewer system in the city is typically designed for a 5 or a 10-year storm. So you still have to have that piped infrastructure in place. Where you get your real benefit is really on the water quality side of it, having, you know, cleaner water that's being discharged to our local creeks and waterways. So I think that's your big cost benefit.
You mentioned that your consultant said that there were actually kind of poor participation rates under some of these programs.
And that's for the credits. Usually the incentives.
Okay, the incentives are okay. So incentives, you get pretty good participation. Is there any way to bump up participation rates in the credit programs?
There is, and I mean, you can make your rules, you know, laxer or change the programs to make them more appealing to the, you know, property owners. And I'll point out that's one thing. This is a starting point for us. You know, these are our initial recommendations. After we have a year of having this implemented, we will come back and look and see what sort of participation we're getting, and, you know, solicit feedback, you know, from the advisory committee again and the community as far as, you know, what people liked, you know, what they thought were effective. And, you know, it'll be a program that morphs and grows over time, and we'll always pursue what, you know, we think is the, you know, popular and the best way to do it. We're not, you know, this isn't set in stone, this is what we're going to do. It'll change over time. And, you know, obviously in the green infrastructure and best management, you know, fields, that's constantly evolving and changing over time. So, you know, we'll be prepared to, you know, adopt new measures and improve incentives and credits for those as those become available.
One other question with regard to the education program. In the report, they talked about that they target 5th graders because they're sort of good, you know, ambassadors to their families.
Mm-hmm.
Did it go into either the discussions with the consultant or any other materials looked at go into why 5th graders as opposed to 4th graders or 6th graders?
I'd have to check with the consultant on
It's just a
whether-
curiosity question.
I know we've partnered in the past with the Urbana Middle School, and I think there we primarily dealt with 6th graders. And I know there's some advantages in that general range where, you know, they're pretty interested and excited about a lot of the science-based activities and have the ability to go home and kind of bend their parents' ears, where some of the younger ones aren't, you know, don't have that ability, and some of the older ones, you know, they don't want to talk to their parents kind of thing. So
I have another question. I've read some statistics. The number doesn't come to mind now, but the number of gallons that a mature tree will detain or retain or evapotranspire or whatever it is. Does some kind of incentive around tree retention or tree planting make sense for this program?
yeah, and actually the city arborist has brought that to our attention and wanted to know if it might be possible to, you know, have some incentive, you know, or spend some funds on tree planting. So, and we'll take a look into that.
Yeah, I mean, if you'd consider it, think about just to the extent you can implement it. I don't know, but just where it's discretionary, tree retention is a big one because the full-size trees, the current ones, are sort of at their peak water diversion ability.
Yeah, they intersect, and there's
Sometimes
other
a developer or
environmental
whatever would have a
benefits.
choice between removing a tree or not, and it can. I've seen some numbers that are like 500 gallons a day or whatever. That's more than a rain barrel ever would be. So if
Yeah.
there could be some incentive there.
So for the, am I doing this right? So for the tax, is it like area, or how is the tax going to work?
Well, it's
Like
based on the amount of
flat.
impervious area. For single-family residential properties, a flat fee everybody pays, and we're estimating that it'll fall in the range of $4.90 a month to $5.15. So for single-family residential, everyone would pay the same fee regardless of the area. When you get out of single-family residential, then it's actually based on the calculated impervious area. You know, an impervious area would be your, you know, rooftop surfaces, your driveway, you know, pavement surfaces. So, you know, for non-residential properties, I mean, they'll use the aerial photography to actually measure the amount of impervious area, and then they calculate how many residential equivalents that is. That we calculated the average residential parcel in Urbana has 3,100 square feet. So you take the total impervious area for non-residential properties, divide it by 3,100, and that's how many equivalent residential, and they're multiplied by the same fee that the residential property, so they're times by 490 or to 515 a month. Todd?
Did I hear you say that the billing cycle is likely to be monthly or bi-monthly?
Some of it is going to depend upon who we go with a billing agent. Right now, we're looking at probably the best partnership is with the Urbana Sanitary District, and I think they send out their bills every other month. So if they're the selected agent, we would be on their billing system cycle.
Aren't they the ones that charge $2 for the privilege of getting a bill on top of the fee they charge?
I'm not sure exactly what their policy is as far as payment goes.
Well, I was wondering, with these small amounts per month, just mailing the bill is several percentages of the amount you're billing. You know, it's not an insignificant amount.
And that's
the
what
postage and handling on a bill for $5 is significant.
Well, and that's
So
why
what I was wondering is,
there's some advantages going with an existing billing system. We actually investigated going with Illinois American Water Company as a possibility. We looked at the possibility of going on the, tax assessor's bill. There's actually some legal issues and challenges with that. And we also looked at, piggybacking on the recycling bill. Like I said, right now it seems like the best option is probably for us to go on the Urbana-Champaign Sanitary District bill because it's an existing bill that goes out, so the cost of adding it is smaller than sending out a new bill. And they're already billing our sanitary sewer user fees, so this would just be an additional line item on that bill.
Okay, I have another question. I have another two questions. 50% credit for discharging directly to a creek.
Mm-hmm.
What are the requirements to make sure that water is okay to be discharged into a creek? Is it? I'm just not familiar with the regulatory structure. They can just take whatever's coming off their parking lots and put it directly to the creek, and get a 50% credit.
I think some of that depends on the size of the parcel. Like I said, for parcels over a certain size, the state of Illinois requires you to have an NPDES permit, for stormwater, similar to what the city has. So they would be regulated. I don't think for the smaller parcels they are.
Okay.
And I'll point out, even with the city regulations regarding, water quality, it's certain measures that we have to adopt. They don't actually go out and measure how many, total suspended solids or ammonia nitrogen or, anything that you're discharging. It's just you agree to certain practices to try to reduce water pollution.
Mm-hmm. And my other question has to do with cisterns. A lot of our older neighborhoods, my house, we have an old cistern in the back. Are you aware of, is there any technology for rehabbing cisterns? Like, I know they can rehab pipes with those expanding plastic things. I mean, is there some big Tyvek bag I can put in my brick cistern to make it hold water? I'm just sort of curious about that. I mean, because it's a lot of infrastructure, but I have no idea how it would perform right now.
Possibly. I know we deal a lot with manhole rehab, and they actually have some spray-on liner systems for, that they can literally go with a spray gun and spray on a coating that gives them structural integrity and seals them up so they're watertight. That might be applicable. And they're fairly low cost. The cured in place lining they're referring to tends to be pretty expensive. I know when we did some manholes with that, I mean, it was $7,000-8,000 a pop.
Okay.
So, but the spray technology where they're putting a coating on it, whether it's cementitious or they have some epoxy coatings and stuff, they can seal it up, might work.
That's good to know. Thanks.
If for many of these, like the rain garden and cistern and Purvis, green roof, it says design must be approved by the city. So this would have to be all new installation, or could something that already be done?
No, I think we would count existing infrastructure if it met the standards. We'd probably have to come out and inspect it and verify, that it was in working condition, as part of the approval process.
Because it says both design approved and installation verified. It makes it seem like the design is before it's in and then installation after. But so it suggests it would be new, but you're saying that.
I think we would count existing.
If it already exists.
It would be eligible if people already have, pervious pavement, installed. For example, MTD has that, pervious parking lot, and if there was I'm not aware of any that have green roofs here in Urbana, but if there was someone that had a green roof, I think we would provide them a credit for that.
Any other? All right. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And like I said, if you guys have any questions or have any great ideas you want to share with us, please feel free to. Like I said, if you could route them through Bart, and he'll make sure that I get them.
And do we want to get that in? What's kind of a deadline for that?
Well, I was thinking that if commission members have some specific questions, maybe within the next week, route those to me, and then I can pass those on to Brad, and then before the holidays, he can formulate some responses to those questions, and that way, by the January commission meeting, we would hopefully have all the information and time to review it in order to make whatever comments or recommendations the commission might desire.
I got one more. Just by way of comment, given the small amount of money involved for residential, you might look into having it billed every 6 months or something like that through the sanitary district or someone. People don't want to write a $4.95 check or try to track it through their bank system.
Well, it would actually be included in the total bill from the district, so it would be included in part of your payment to the district. So since most people are already getting a sewer bill, it would just essentially add on to the amount of money that you're paying as part of your sewer bill to the district. That check that you wrote out would increase. So you wouldn't necessarily write a separate check out for just a stormwater utility fee. It would just be part of your payment to the district. That included both your sanitary and your storm.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move to the staff report.
You have before you your December staff report. There's just a few things on there that I wanted to bring to your attention. I'll skip down to the second item first. Recently, the Regional Planning Commission was notified that they were not awarded a federal Sustainable Communities Regional Planning Grant. That was something we had discussed last month and maybe even the month before. And that would have included participation by city staff here. So unfortunately, they were not funded for that project. In fact, there were no regional planning sustainability grants awarded federally to any entities in Illinois this grant round. And it also looks like the federal government is now going to eliminate that grant funding beyond the current fiscal year. So not good news as far as the federal funding for regional sustainability planning. I'll jump down to the third item now. The asphalt shingle recycling, it looks like there is a company that's interested in bringing a facility to Urbana to collect asphalt shingles for recycling. So that has some promise. Diverting construction and demolition debris material from landfills is one of the City Council's goals, and that would help in that effort. Basically, the facility would tear off asphalt shingles, and they would charge a tipping fee. The tipping fee would be significantly lower than local transfer stations or landfills. And so you would have waste haulers and also roofing contractors bringing their waste shingles to the facility. Right now what they're proposing is the Urbana site would basically be a transfer site. So they would store the material there. They would haul it from Urbana over to Peoria, where they would grind and process the material, and then on the trucks back to Urbana they would ship the ground recycled asphalt shingles, which are used in hot mix asphalt paving. So there was some legislation earlier this year in Illinois to encourage the use of recycled asphalt shingles in hot mix asphalt, and IDOT has developed some specifications for its use. So you know, the regulatory environment for doing that has improved a lot, and also within the past 2 years, Illinois EPA has developed a process they call the beneficial use determination, and that allows shingle recyclers like this to set up facilities to collect shingles. Basically, these facilities have to fill out a application, and then basically when they get that determination from IEPA, then it's not considered a waste material, so they don't have to comply with local siting like a transfer station or a landfill. The location I think this company is looking at the location would probably require a special use permit where it would be located, so that would give the city the opportunity to take a look at the proposed site, and put any restrictions or anything like that onto the use of the site for that purpose. So I'll keep the commission informed on that. I think it holds some promise, and it's a waste stream that's currently just being landfilled right now locally. So open up a new recycling stream here in Urbana. Yes, sir.
Related to that, what about the road asphalt? Is that recycled in Urbana or Champaign? Do you know what's done with that?
Sure. Did Brad leave? Yes. Brad could probably answer that better than I, but yeah, there is some recycling of that. Now, a lot of road asphalt gets ground up right there on the side and remilled back into the road work. And then there's also, I believe, some companies up on North Lincoln, North Oak Street that are recycling concrete and asphalt, things like that. And then the last item on the staff report, municipal aggregation. I wanted to come back and touch on that. We've spoken about that the past couple months. That's something we're still looking into. There will be a discussion at next Monday's Committee of the Whole meeting with the City Council to further look at aggregation and possibly consider placing that on the March 20th, 2012 ballot for a referendum here in the city of Urbana. So, as you'll recall, in order for municipal aggregation to exist in an opt-out form as we want it to, there has to be a referendum approved by the voters. So basically with an opt-out program, if the voters approve that, then everyone becomes a member of that aggregated electrical load, except for certain people that are currently contracted with other alternate retail providers, so anyone besides Ameren, and then like small businesses that are under contract with other programs like through the chamber, co-op, things like that. So the participation rates in opt-out programs are typically 90% or above versus an opt-in program, which is much smaller, maybe 10%, somewhere in that range. So certainly an opt-out program is preferred. And basically the savings that residents and small businesses could receive through aggregation, we're still trying to pin down those numbers. Somewhere in the 8 to 15% range off of their total electric bill. Fairly good savings. It's not world-stopping, but good savings, and also at the same time, if we were able to implement some requirements to purchase green energy, things like that, along with that, that, like we've talked about before, has potential to significantly reduce our emissions that we're responsible for here in Urbana, and would enable us to, make, I think, some significant headway toward our climate action goals. So still working on that. Like I said, be discussed next Monday at the Committee of the Whole meeting, and city staff in Urbana are working currently with city staff in Champaign, Savoy, and with the county as well, because they're all looking at placing this matter on the ballot in March. And so we're currently looking at different consultants that could help us through this process. I think we all realize that purchasing large amounts of energy requires some special expertise in going through that process, so we're all seeking out someone who can help us with that process. And so we're currently looking at those right now, and hopefully if City Council decides to go forward and put this on the March referendum, then we'll be able to elicit those services. And of course, that still starts a whole new phase of trying to educate the public about what is municipal electric aggregation. We can't, whatever activities the city participates in, we can only be educational. We can't necessarily take a stand necessarily one way or the other on it from a city staff perspective. So, so we'll be developing some educational materials, getting some materials on the website, and probably trying to collaborate with those other units of government as much as we can to coordinate a single message out there to the public, so we're not all sending out various messages. And so I think we'll see that starting to develop here soon too.
Can I wanted to add something to that? It seems like based on the draft greenhouse reduction plan that was distributed, it seems like something like the municipal electrical aggregation could be absolutely key to reaching the draft goals. So it seems like this is a really important opportunity to me, and it reminds me of what City of Columbia, Missouri has been doing. Columbia, Missouri is a college town also, and it's a little larger than here. But they have the benefit of owning their own utility. I know it's electric and maybe gas as well. But they, by municipal ordinance some years ago, they established that they were going to, a certain percentage of their, energy that's produced by their own utility was going to be through renewable resources. And it started out like 2%, and then it went up to 5%. You know, it's a scale. Every few years they've got to increase it. And now they're up to about 12% of the energy that's produced by their own utility is through renewable resources. And for instance, what I recall is they have there's a wind farm about like 100 miles away that produces electricity that feeds into the system. I don't know if any of those electrons actually reaches Columbia, but you know, it's contributing to the whole pool of electricity that they're drawing from. And then also I think their municipal landfill is what I recall. They capture methane and somehow reuse that. That helps them reach that goal. The reason I mention that is we don't have a municipally owned utility here, and I'm not saying we are, and I'm not proposing anything like that, but it's a little bit akin, because if you can get together as a community and you can buy essentially you're creating the rules for producers to sell you a whole raft of energy. And so if you could do that, and then as a part of the requirement, require that a certain percentage be renewable energy, and maybe you have an escalating percentage over a period of years so they can reach that goal more easily. Again, it just seems like we have a really golden opportunity here.
Bart, is there a trade-off relating to the price of energy we're able to procure by cooperating with the other government entities versus doing it ourselves? And how does it relate to Urbana's ability to achieve its goals around green energy, that cooperation?
Strangely enough, it does not increase the pricing favorability by all of us going together. So if we were all to go out to bid on one contract for all these units of government, from what we've seen, it wouldn't improve the pricing that we would receive. So so right now we're cooperating on looking at consultants. We may even hire the same consultant. We may hire different consultants. And when it comes time to bid out, if we were to all choose the same consultant and work together, we would probably all do at least we might do the same bid but have resulting contracts that are all different because we all have different needs, different goals, and we might want different terms in those resulting contracts. So So cooperating right now, for as long as we can to get some benefits of that collaborative effort. But at some point, if we need to break off, anybody needs to break off from that group and work on their own, then they can do that, because it's not going to damage the price that we're eventually going to get from our electrical supplier. And then the other question was what?
You sort of answered it by answering that first question that way. It was, will ultimately we be forced with a trade-off of an additional 4% discount for cooperating, but having to sacrifice our ability to go after a desired percentage of green power, because the rest of the group didn't want that or something. But it sounds like you're saying that there's not necessarily a coupling of those issues.
Yeah, by doing it this way, we don't all have to agree in stone to the same end goals up front. We can, we can go through this process as together as we want, and anybody can break off at whatever time that they might want to do that. So I think we can all, if we all have different renewable energy goals, that's fine, and we're going to. What might end up happening is we, end up bidding out the electrical supply contract, and we have, a pricing matrix that's, have suppliers bid from 100% traditional energy to 100% green energy, and we have different mixtures in there, and then we can see where the pricing comes back and at what price point are we comfortable with making trades between cost and green energy. Now, having said that, like we've talked about before, the price points between the traditional and the green, in the one example that I provided recently in Illinois, Oak Park, the cost was very close. So there, the trade-off, there was no need to make a decision because the price point was so close between the two. So it really, was just common sense for them to go ahead and buy the green energy with the price points that they had.
Push that a bit to see how this would really work. So if we get the city council says we're going to put this on the ballot, and then if that is approved, now who makes the next decision as to which contract to go with? So, for example, if it came back to us that we could get 100% green energy, it's going to cost us 2% more than what we're paying now. Could a decision be made that we're going to do that, and if people don't like it, they can opt out? I'm just trying to see how far this could go on the green side.
Some goals would have to be set and decisions made before the electrical supply contract were to actually be bid, so that we would know that if the prices come back and the price for green energy is within so much of traditional energy that the decision has been made that that's the route we'll go, versus if the price point is this far from traditional energy, then we're not going to go that route, or we're going to take some mixture thereof. So some of those decisions will have to be made ahead of time, especially since when buying electricity like that, you have a very short time frame once those bids come back to actually sign a contract. So electrical prices change every day. So usually when you get a price, you have to be able to take action on it. So we'd have to set those, get those approvals and set those processes in place before the energy bids came back, so that we would be able to take action.
But basically, this is a city council decision then as to what flavor we wind up with?
Yes.
And would we have any more input into that?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's something we need to have some discussions on and figure out. If the city is playing an educational role in telling people about what municipal aggregation is, and have to be kind of even keeled on that as far as the benefits and the pros and the cons to it. So if the Sustainability Commission really wants to make some recommendations toward green energy and things like that, then we need to figure out how do we do that with those things in mind. So I think once we, if the city council decides to put this on the ballot, that's going to begin the next phase of this, between December and March, and that whole educational campaign. And I think that's going to be the time where, we need to figure those things out.
So could people opt out at any point? Like, if there was going to be an increase because of green energy, could they then choose to opt out?
And I'll touch on that. But first, I wanted to say that if we were to go out to bid under municipal aggregation for a supply contract, we would not be required to take any of the bids if we didn't like the pricing that was received. So that's also a plus. So you can go through the whole process. You're not committed to anything until you sign the dotted line with the supply contract. And what was? Can they opt out? That's right. So there's two initial periods that you can opt out on with municipal aggregation. So if the voters approved municipal aggregation, then we would go through the process of the bids and getting the pricing and select a supplier. Then that supplier would send out a letter. We would pull all of the Ameren customer accounts, scrub that list, make sure it's appropriate. There's nobody in there that shouldn't be. And then all those customers would get letters telling them about the aggregation program and what they need to do to opt out. And then there's also, so that's before the aggregation takes place, and then there's also a shorter window after the aggregation takes effect that they can also opt out. Now, something we've been talking about with one of the consultants, is that we could structure into the supply contract basically a no penalty for people to opt out at any point through the contract. So that takes away the risk or the doubt that people might have about signing up for aggregation. So if they were able to get out at any point, with 30 days notice or something along those lines, then that also basically takes that opt-out period and extends it through the life of the contract. So that's something we're going to be exploring, and something that the one consultant we're talking with thinks that we can probably do.
Can I ask a question? Even though I'm not a... Oh, go ahead.
If we do a municipal aggregation, what happens to a company like Ameren that currently has the lion's share of the distribution? I guess where I'm coming from is this is a relatively new concept, as I understand it, particularly in Illinois. And there's so much electricity out there, so many units out there. So what I hear is there's going to be lots and lots of companies trying to get a lock on or the rights to a certain amount of generated electricity. And then they're going to sell it to us through some kind of contract. But we have to pick one of these many companies to do our municipal aggregation. Is that right?
But basically, when we go out to bid on a municipal aggregation contract, we would be getting bids from all these alternate retail electric suppliers, so that are out there. I don't want to say competing with Ameren, because really, Ameren is the distribution end of things. So they're going to be the ones distributing the energy from whoever we buy it from. They're the ones that people will continue to call if there's a power outage. They will be the ones that they continue to get a single bill from. So whichever supplier we buy from, we'll have arrangements with Ameren to include that information on their bill and get paid after Ameren gets paid. So yeah, there will be multiple companies out there trying to bid to provide our supply. Most of those are brokers. They're not necessarily in the generation business themselves. Just like Ameren, the distribution company, is not necessarily in the generation business. That's the other side of their company. So Ameren doesn't doesn't care about who the supplier is. That's what they state. So it doesn't matter to them if the supplier we're under contract to is Integris or Constellation or one of these other alternate providers. So they're still the ones managing the distribution system, and it doesn't necessarily matter who the supplier is.
What's the length of your typical contract?
The typical contracts that we've seen under aggregation are running from 12 to 24 months is a typical contract. So a lot of that timing will depend on what the energy markets are at the time we go to bid and what the recommendations of the consultant are. So a 12-month contract, of course, there's less forecasting involved, by the suppliers with the pricing. But at the same time, you don't want to necessarily make your contract so short that as soon as you approve it, you're turning around and starting a new process all over again. So it'll be a balance, and we'll heavily rely upon a consultant to help us make that determination.
All right, in this situation, the city would be in something like a middleman role. Does the city get a fee or compensation or some consideration for giving its business to a certain bidder?
There is the ability to structure something like that into a supply contract. Whether or not we would do that in Urbana would be a city council decision. For example, in Oak Park, they wanted to structure in a per kilowatt hour fee, fractions of a cent, that would then go into a city fund to fund energy efficiency programs for city buildings and for the community. They ended up not employing that strategy, but those are the types of ideas that could be included in a program. So, it's largely going to depend on, how much is your savings going to be, and if you want to include renewable energy credits, that might cost you 0.2 of a cent per kilowatt hour, and if you want to include other things, then those might add another 1/10 or 2/10 of a cent on. So, it's a matter of balancing what your savings are going to be for the program participants, and what are your goals for the overall program, and what are those associated costs going to be for those goals.
Here's a real possibly dumb question. So purchase contracts are often for, a certain amount of energy over a certain amount of time. And given we almost certainly have uncertainty about what that amount's going to be, how are the contracts structured?
I think the consultant that we employ will help us determine a pretty good estimate as to what our load would be. Just off the cuff estimates that I've heard, it would be roughly 180 million kilowatt hours per year for the load in Urbana. That would be the residents and small businesses that would be eligible for the aggregation program. So that's just an off the cuff estimate at this point in time. We would get a closer estimate because obviously the suppliers want to know what the load is they're bidding on, and so that information will come out as we if this is approved to go on the March ballot, then we'll be doing some preliminary work, so the education, and then also working to develop a plan of governance and operation. That's something that the Illinois Commerce Commission requires that the city develop and submit to them before the aggregation program takes place. So this will be basically the document. This is how the aggregation program will work, and this is how we're going to govern it and things like that. So most of those have been pretty boilerplate. You can find those on the internet. Other Illinois communities have theirs, and they all look pretty much the same. But that doesn't necessarily mean you can't, change things up a little bit if you need to.
But in any case, if we bid in at a certain amount and then it's a warm winter or a cool summer, or we come in under, there's not a penalty for conserving energy. You pay your actual use.
Correct. Most people participating in an aggregation program, they're still going to get their bill from Ameren. they're going to see a change in the supply portion on the bill, but it's still going to be one bill, and unless they are really looking at their electric bill, if they don't opt out, then really all they're doing is seeing the savings. So they're not necessarily seeing anything change. It's not like the grid's going to shut down and another lever is going to turn on and the juice is going to come from somewhere else. So. And I wanted to touch on another question I think John had posed maybe last month regarding the financial stability of these alternate suppliers. So that that's something that the consultant studies and looks at to make sure that whoever is bidding to be the electric supplier is from an organizational perspective, from a financial perspective, from a regulatory perspective, they're capable of being the supplier for that contract, and just as a fallback with state law, Ameren is what they call the provider of last resort. So if an aggregator, if an aggregation supplier is for whatever reason unable to provide the supply, then the supply automatically goes back to Ameren. So if an alternate supplier files for bankruptcy, then Ameren steps in and becomes the provider again automatically. So you don't have to worry about that. Although of course we want to make sure we do all of the due diligence to look at these alternate suppliers and make sure they're capable of fulfilling the contract.
Are the savings guaranteed? In other words, can you get in a situation where the supplier you picked suddenly has a problem, or other rates go down and you're stuck with the contract at whatever price you had?
That's the price is guaranteed by the contract. Now, that's part of the finesse of the contract and the timing of that, because every May, Ameren releases its new default rate for electricity for the period starting June 1. So, likely we would want to know what that default rate that is put out there by Ameren in May 2012. We would want to know what that rate is going to be before we contract beyond that. So we know what the default rate is. We know, so then we can directly compare what the savings under an aggregated program would be versus what the Ameren rate would be. And then if you did a longer contract than 12 months, then you would be having to do some forecasting, via the consultants for them to kind of forecast what will the default rate be the following year, and is the rate that you're receiving from the suppliers under the bid worth making that contract longer than 12 months or not.
Are there other questions or comments?
If the city council goes ahead with putting it on the ballot in March, is that right? No one will know by that time who the potential company would be, or the rates or anything like that. I think so. That would be done after, if it's on the ballot and the voters say, okay, we allow the city of Urbana to act on our behalf to accept bids. All the bids and the rates and all that sort of thing would come after that election. Is that right?
Yeah, the bids could come before the March ballot. Most of the consultants we've talked to prefer to do it immediately afterward, but there are some consultants that would basically lead us through the process of getting at least maybe pre-qualifying the suppliers before the ballot, and then firming up the price right afterwards. So that might help us get the aggregation flowing, maybe 1 month sooner than it would otherwise. So, but no, people won't necessarily know what the price is going to be before the March ballot. So that's a lot of the education we'll have to do with people is, here's what aggregation is. Here's the risks, and here's how we're minimizing those risks, and here's how you are protected, by the opt-out provisions, and if we can include in there, no opt-out penalties once you get into the contract. So basically laying it out for them, how we're trying to minimize those risks and, remove that doubt that they might have that, this program one that I want to basically vote for.
I guess my final question is, what's the rush? I mean, we heard about municipal aggregation very recently. I don't know how long the city council's been aware of it. This is December. The public's not been exposed to this at all. The election's in March or April, and you want to have the bidding process and things going so this whole thing is operational in June or July, or?
Yeah, there's two reasons for the rush. One is the deadline to get it on the ballot in Champaign County is January 3rd. So that would mean City Council would have to approve it probably at their December 19th council meeting. And then the second reason is because the savings at the beginning of the program are projected to be the biggest around. So the savings that we'll potentially see next year are the greatest ones, and then then the savings beyond that are probably going to drop off somewhat. So that's really the rush, is to help residents and small businesses save more on their electric bill for as long as they can.
Other comments, questions? All right, thank you. Okay, I guess we are on to our continuing business and taking a look at the Climate Action Plan. Todd, in his email saying that he was not going to be able to join us tonight, said that he is going to extend the new revised list of strategies out next week, so we will not have that in front of us tonight to discuss. So we'll have that next time around. I did want to point to in the draft that was distributed in the section on SAC review. It's about, it's on page, well, the pages are kind of messed up with the insertion of all the graphics, but the numbered page 6, towards the bottom there was a list. And I threw a highlight on it because I heard from Bart over the weekend that there was some concern with among the community development staff, regarding 4 of the items on that list: the revisions to the zoning map, annexation, zoning variances, and incentives for greenfield development and for brownfield and infill development. So I had a phone meeting with Bart and Libby, in which she explained that some of the review processes that are established for in those areas are somewhat bound both by statutory law and case law with regard to because they tend to affect, well, as you can imagine, people's property rights, taxation bodies. So she was concerned that if we simply put this wording in here the way that it is, that it could open the city to some liability. So what we talked about, because I was expressing, that, we as an advisory commission do need to have some venue for commenting on land use issues, because land use is so very intricately tied up with sustainability. So what we talked about was basically removing those 4 specific items and then putting in a line that says major land use and development issues, which would be a little bit, drawing back to a little less of a kind of case-by-case idea and more of a, maybe we might hear about a major case or major development plan or something like that, but to bring it back a little bit more to the planning and policy level. I talked to her a little bit about, as we move forward as an advisory body and as we, pull together more pieces of the sustainability plan, I mean, this is just kind of our first piece of a broader sustainability plan, that it's going to be important for us to kind of have some feedback about, when we're setting some of these principles in place and some of the policies in place through our documents, what's the ripple effect? Is it having the effect that we want to see it have as some of the more day-to-day decisions are made? And so what she said was probably a viable way to do that is that there would be, some of those items would be included in a staff report, maybe about some of the decisions that have, fairly clear relationships to sustainability issues. So that is why, or I guess that's currently what I would want to put out there on the table as part of this draft. Removal of those 4 items, replacement with the wording major land use and development issues. As a related issue coming out of that conversation, also talked about having community development staff do a series of presentations for us on how zoning and annexation decisions are made and on the relevant documents that shape that decision-making process. And that, I think, will help us in our work as, some of these documents that are already listed there and maybe some that we haven't really thought about before come forward for comment. Robert.
Yeah, in reviewing the draft, I was thinking, and along the lines of what you're talking about, if this body could help the city set the policies, set up the rules for development, and help review relevant policy documents to set what our rules are going to be in the future, and then the city staff can then carry out those policies and rules through all the development proposals. And then that way you wouldn't have to get bogged down in some of the minutia, honestly, because like a zoning variance for greenfield development, sometimes it says detailed as someone's applying, and this has actually happened this year, someone is applying for a 4-inch variance for their kitchen, so it extend into the side yard, or a sign, they want to have it 110 square feet instead of 100 square feet. But we review maybe like 100 annexation cases and variance cases and things like that a year. But if this body could help the city establish the policies for what the rules are when those cases come up, I think you all can play a big role in helping shape the community. Because as a recommending body, we can and should be bringing things to you, like the subdivision ordinance is being updated right now. So that's kind of a golden opportunity. We can bring not just the Plan Commission, the City Council, but we can bring the subdivision ordinance revisions to this body and ask for your advice and see what we can do to make any improvements or suggestions. And so then when the subdivision ordinance is carried out on a day-to-day basis with new subdivisions, then we'll follow those rules and help implement what you all want to do.
Steve.
I think that's a good suggestion, and if I understand it, it's a little different than changing the wording to just major land use and development issues. Because and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to articulate the difference, but one way of saying major land use and development issues would be just the biggies, the 5 biggest projects of the year. But, you can do a thought experiment and say those might contribute to, a quote footprint of 10% of the total development decisions made of the year. The other were 300 tiny ones that were too small to measure individually, but cumulatively were the lion's share of like our sustainability performance. And if we could have input on the policies which governed them, that sounds like it's the most efficient use of our time and possibly the most efficient way to have an impact over myriad small decisions that it's not practical to get involved in at the granular level.
Right, and I think, we do already have in this list things like the comprehensive plan, downtown strategic plan. We already have ordinances that are related to energy use, such as building codes. And I wonder whether there's a way to either expand the language that we have on the ordinance bullet point, or perhaps add another one that would include other types of ordinances. I'm not, no wonderful wording is coalescing.
Well,
in my
Robert
head at
mentioned the
moment, but-
subdivision ordinance as an example. I don't really, I'm not prepared to come up with other examples either.
Yeah.
Can you think of a way to operationalize your comments there?
Yeah, really just public policies and plans that impact energy and greenhouse, well, sustainability generally, really. Yeah, I think that we can bring those for advice and comment. That's good.
The very last bullet point in the list currently says other strategic plans whose content relates to the greenhouse gas emissions, whose content relates to greenhouse gas emissions, including but not limited to transportation, economic development, and land use.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if we just expand that last bullet point to say other policies, plans, and ordinances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, reading this has made me realize that we need to, we should give you a presentation on the downtown plan, the draft that's being produced currently, and get some feedback, and I think that would be a great idea, because we're in the process of updating the 2002 strategic plan for downtown.
Are there other comments either on that list or other portions of this draft? John?
Yeah, I was also thinking in reading the draft, there's a couple ways to move forward. One is to continue on the framework that you set up here, and a different one, and maybe you've talked about this. Here's Johnny Come Lately making a suggestion for thought, but maybe you've already thought about this and rejected it. But another way to move forward would be to come out with a technical report that details all of the 2007 levels, and then the next step could be the plan based on that report, and then in that report, the 2007, in that report of the the status, then you could go into the explanation of the background of, what are greenhouse gases, which ones are involved, how are they produced, and some of the charts, for instance, you could explain, is the University of Illinois involved, a part of these charts or numbers or not, some of the background information, because people will naturally ask those sorts of questions, and then you could kind of refer them to the background study or report and make that kind of like the first step.
Yeah.
Maybe you've already discarded that idea.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that in particular. I think to some extent because some of that information is available from other sources, but it might not hurt for us to compile some kind of a bibliography or, set of web links for people to go and find out some of that information. But I certainly think we should explain that our numbers do not include the university campus, because I think that is a very likely question that people would ask. So.
Sometimes when the term city is used, some people think of it just as the city corporate, the city hall, so to speak, rather than the entire community. And some things like that.
And also, you asked the question about the charts and the graphs, and if they were reflective of the most current data we had from Ameren. I do not believe they are. So I need to get those updated to include the latest estimate of 2007 data. So So as you recall, we had some change in how those numbers came from Ameren. They looked a little different the first time to the second time for the same period of time. So so I don't believe these are reflective of those changes. So I need to get those updated, and I'll do that.
Great. Gary?
Comment related to the graphs. Man, there's a lot of interesting information here. But I was wondering if it might be possible to have one that really gives an overview of just about everything that you could get into it. So the first one, pie chart that comes up is the emissions by sector, right? That's the total pie, right? That's everything. It's not labeled, is it? Urbanity community CO2e emissions by sector with the total, right? That's the big, right? Now, that residential, we look later at gas and stuff, we'll see how much is it residential, this, that, and the other thing. But that's a big pie there, say residential. Couldn't we even on this see shades of red that would say how much of that is electricity, how much of that is gas? Plus it would be the two main ones right there. And I don't know, try to get as much into one so you can see, okay, that's a pie slice that we really need to go after. I mean, it's all here, but it keeps coming up in parts after this one. Right, and you lose the total after that. Because then you get the fuel type. You have electricity consumption, but then you're looking at electricity and you don't know. Well, again, what's the total that electricity contributes to our footprint? You got to go back and look at the other one. So that's just something that I was sort of looking for, even though I've seen these many times. When we start thinking now of what are the things you really want to go after, to provide the target makes it clearest as to where these are. And of course, electricity certainly does, pop out, but it doesn't pop out, well, it pops out in the second graph. But then if we look at the second graph, no, is that the second graph? Is it? Yeah, it comes out in the third one, electricity consumption, but now we've lost sight of how much is that of the total already, because we're looking at just electricity. Am I making myself clear what I was sort of would like to see?
I would agree. And if we have the underlying spreadsheets for these, which I think we do, I'd be willing to play around with alternative graphical presentation of the data, so it doesn't take up as much space, and so we have you can more readily make comparisons at a single glance. I think we could make some improvements there.
Yeah, that'd be great. But with the new data, too.
Yes.
John?
Yeah, it would seem we want to play around a little more with some of the information on page 5 to make it clearer what we're actually expecting to happen in the plan. Like, my recollection is that early on we said we were looking at an absolute reduction, not a per capita. Because one of the questions we raised was, if the city grows, the amount of emissions is likely to grow, but if we are trying to be an absolute reduction from our 2007 level, that is dramatically harder to reach than a per capita reduction.
Right.
And then we get into things like whether or not we want to try and approximate the 1990 emission level to define a 2050 goal. That would seem to mean that we want to, for our 2000, the way I read this, our 2025 goal is to get a 25% decrease based on the 2007 baseline, but this implies that by 2050 we might want to try and figure out what our 1990 emission was and base the 2050 number, our goal, on the 1990 estimate. So it's a little bit confusing. I'm just saying we need to probably clarify that.
Yes, absolutely.
But make it very clear to the readers of this document how dramatic a reduction we're looking for, whether it's the per capita or the absolute. I would also think in the 3 places where we mention municipal aggregation, we want to decouple the municipal aggregation from the greenhouse gas emissions a little more than it is now. Right now it's in the same sentence. The implication is they go together. But based on our prior discussion, it would seem to me we could have a municipal aggregation plan that's 100% coal.
Well, the way that, at least my intention in the way that I drafted that language was to make it clear that it would be municipal aggregation that is used in order to. So, for instance, on the page 6?
Actually,
In
page
that
1 and
section,
6 say
yeah.
it that way.
But
I'm
a
just
key
saying-
strategy is obtaining clean, renewable electric power through a municipal aggregation program. So the emphasis is really on obtaining the clean, renewable electric power, and then the municipal aggregation program is a vehicle for doing that.
Yeah, I understand that's how the sentence parses.
Yeah.
But the impression, we're going to get a chicken-egg thing. There's going to be people out there saying we need to adopt municipal aggregation to do the Clean Action Plan. There's others going to saying the Clean Action Plan is driving the municipal aggregation and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it should be clear that there's a municipal aggregation ordinance or referendum being considered that could be a key element in reaching our goals, provided that the municipality goes after the green
Okay.
energy.
I thought that was clear, but I can just redraft the language to bring that point out more, make it pop out more.
I think something else that we need to get in here is the impact of rental units on the problem we're facing. I mean, we've had many discussions here over the past 2 years about how the way things are now, landlords have very little incentive to put in energy efficient appliances, adequate insulation, air conditioners that are sized properly for the facility because somebody else is paying the utilities. So
I suppose
most people don't realize the degree to which Urbana's residences are rental units. And that has a huge impact on our situation here.
I guess maybe the question out to the commission is whether we want to tackle that question in the Phase 1 document, given its complexity. And I'm not saying we shouldn't, because I think it is a really critical issue, especially in a community like this that has so many renters. I mean, my own thoughts are running that, that would get a little bit more into the list of strategies, but if we want to also, make comment of it outside of the list of strategies, I don't see any reason we couldn't. It's just a decision that we need to make. Do we want to put it in Phase 1 or wait for Phase 2?
Maria, can you clarify the list of strategies, which is the same as the document that Todd and others are working on, right?
The list of strategies is the document that Todd's working on. Yeah.
So, I mean, for most specific strategies, other than the very few that are called out in the introduction and given bullet treatment, are dealt with as they're listed in that. They're listed, they're quantified to an extent. We make whatever we flesh them out to the degree we can, but we're not recommending them for implementation.
I think my intention was not to mention, aside from municipal aggregation for the purchase of green power, because that one is so central to being able to reach our goals. My intention was not to mention any strategies in the rest of the document, but just to stick to principles, review, and that kind of thing. So if there are strategies in here, those we'd probably want to pull those back out again.
Okay.
Well, I think there's a weakness here. I assume the strategies we're going in based on some of the blanks here, but I don't mean all of them. But
the list of strategies is what I mean, is that the list of strategies would just be the list of strategies. And the rest of the document, the intention was to devote the rest of the document to defining vision, principles, review powers, and then kind of a list of, at the end, there's kind of, list of efforts to date that the city has undertaken, just as a, sort of a, I guess like it's not, benchmarking isn't the right word, but, just kind of saying, okay, this is where the city was at the point that this Phase 1 document was adopted.
Okay, but I'm looking at it from the point of view of the only thing we're really mentioning here as helping us attain the goal in any substantive way is municipal aggregation. It would be useful, in my opinion, to say somewhere in here, before you mention the municipal aggregation, that we looked at many of the more traditional or upfront strategies for saving energy, reducing greenhouse gases, including in-home energy efficiency, etc. And in aggregate, they amounted to a relatively small fraction, less than 20%, less than 15% of the goal. Therefore, in looking for additional strategies that would make substantive progress.
Send me a paragraph. Send me a paragraph. I'll put it in.
It'll be a different writing style. Anyway, my
That's
point
okay.
is
I can
we're
blend it.
dropping this bomb of the municipal aggregation. This is going to hit the public all at once. And what they've been hearing about is light bulbs and insulation and things of that nature. So we need to say we're not abandoning those things. Those things will not reach the goal. They're not enough. And here's something that can take a big bite out of the target.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I think that's it's a good way of kind of bringing it in. But yeah, if you want to go ahead and send me a paragraph, I'll blend it in.
Can I say something else here? I think I said this last month or the month before, and I just think we have to be careful about how we talk about municipal aggregation, what we expect of it in terms of fulfilling our goals as a commission. When we have goals that extend out 25 years and municipal aggregation contracts extend out 12 months to 24 months, I think using terms like reaching a lot of our goals when we talk about it is very uncertain. I think we should not make the leap that we're going to be able to lock in 20 years, 25 years of sustained progress through municipal aggregation, given uncertainties in the market and political support for what the public's willing to trade off between the price they pay for energy and the substantial but indirect benefits the public gets from buying clean energy as opposed to traditional energy. So I don't think for a minute there's nothing about what I'm saying that wouldn't make even locking in 12 months of benefit worthwhile. I think it is. But I just don't think we should allow we should just be careful about how we describe the potential upsides and benefits of this. In particular, believe me, I was as eager as anybody to get euphoric about the potential upsides, but it's not necessarily there.
Yeah. And again, I would gladly accept some language to bring in.
But related to that, the municipal aggregation is a tool, is a current way of getting this green energy now. The emphasis should be on the green energy. This is what we have available now. The green energy should be growing. I mean, they are putting in, 100 turbines. I mean, it's going to be, it's in our future for this
That's
part
right.
of the country.
It's both growing and it's coming down in cost. So,
Yeah.
I mean, what currently now you can say, and especially backward looking, well, everyone knows green energy is a little bit more expensive. And that's
Right.
not going to be the case continually over the next 25 years at all.
This is a way of getting a jump start into that. So
Mhm.
yeah, you just made it sound a little bit more pessimistic than I wanted.
Yeah,
it
I don't.
sounding.
You're right. We shouldn't err on the other side either. I agree. There's a lot of upside, and the biggest one is establishing an opt-in and opt-out program for aggregating the community's, meeting the community's electric load.
I think it's important to point out that, with the state's renewable portfolio standards, currently basically everyone is using, I believe, 7% renewable energy right now at this point. So most people aren't even realizing that. So it's important to point out that we're, what's that? Yes, yeah, Ameren. Yeah, so basically Ameren has to tell the Interstate Commerce Commission every year what the ratio of their supply is, and I think currently, they're meeting what they're required to for the state, and it's 7%, I believe, for 2011. I don't know.
7% of the way towards its goal.
And they have to increase that every year between now and I think that has to be 25% by 2025 is what the state's renewable portfolio standard is. So we're going to get there incrementally toward a larger component of green energy in everyone's bill, no matter what you do. So I think it is important to point out that we are doing it, but this is a way to do it faster and to potentially do it to 100%.
I want to go back to John's comment on the information that's on page 5, because actually I think you get straight to what I found the most difficult piece of this to draft, because it wasn't clear to me. I don't know that we've made clear decisions on all of those issues. I know we've talked back and forth. We've leaned toward that we want to have it be an absolute, 25% be an absolute. We've had some discussions where maybe we were backing off from that a little bit. So perhaps the question for tonight is, do we want to just go ahead and make a declaration one way or the other? And then that's going to help it. That's going to help me be able to go back in here and clarify that, because then I'll know what it is that we as a group are aiming for.
Well, I'll go ahead and move that we adopt an absolute goal. I mean, we have other language in there that talks about modifying the goal if necessary for practical reasons or economic reasons or whatever. The goal, most atmospheric greenhouse gas stabilization plans talk about, the only way to stabilize the atmosphere is to reduce absolute emissions, because the emissions persist for decades or more than 100 years. And so if Urbana is going to, do its part towards an overall absolute reduction in emissions, then that's what we have to be talking about here. So I would just move we make it absolute.
Is there a second? Okay. Discussion? John.
I don't know if we're ready to do this tonight or not, but we also need to recognize that if the rest of the world is using 1990 and we're using 2007, we have already handicapped ourselves dramatically, because all those energy efficient furnaces that went in the 80s and the ones that went into the 90s don't count. And anything that was done by the city, and people around here were pretty progressive in some of these areas, much of what was done for 17 years doesn't count.
Oh, well, wait a minute, John. If Urbana emitted, say it was 1% less in 1990 than it did in 2007, then our 80% reduction goal would just be more ambitious if we had the lower baseline than the higher. We're not hurting ourselves with a higher baseline.
It depends on whether we had any energy efficiency during that time period. I can tell you that the furnaces in every house I've lived in have been much more efficient than they were when I moved in.
Computer use, think of large TVs.
I'm going to suggest that we hold off on the 1990 debate until we vote on the absolute versus per capita goal. So
okay, does anyone know what the ICLEI, I think ICLEI was absolute, wasn't it? The goal.
Yeah,
so
that's their recommendation, and that's the assumption I've been using all along here, was that's what we were planning for, was an absolute reduction from that 2007 baseline.
Are we ready for a vote? All those in favor of committing to an absolute 25% signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, very good. We've got that. Okay, now let's jump back in and talk about 1990 versus 2007 as our baseline. Because I think that is something that it was a little bit, and even as I was writing this, I was kind of thinking, well, we're citing that 1990 baseline when arguing for adopting the 25% and then ultimately the 80% for 2050, but yet, we're operating on this 2007 because that's what we have the best data for. So, one option would be, simply to ignore it and pull that language out and not worry about it. Another option is, what I have here, which is to acknowledge that there's a discrepancy and say that at some future date that we might want to revisit it and try to base it on an estimate. That does muddy the waters significantly, though. And then, obviously, there are other options that.
I don't think it muddies the water. It's truth in lending. This is what we did. We adopted an absolute number because that's what the rest of the country is basically doing. The rest of the country started in 1990. We can't because we don't have data. So we're using...
I'm sorry, I meant that the idea that we might revisit and try to do an estimate of the 1990, that was the part that muddies the water, and that could be pulled out.
If there's a good way to do it at some point in the future, we should probably do it. So our numbers are consistent with the rest of the world.
And do we want to acknowledge that in this document or commit to it, I guess, in this document?
I would be worried that you'd be committing yourself. If the 1990 sounds good, but if we don't have the data, if we can never capture that data, if it's only estimated, it's kind of like phantom numbers, and but you could always just change the percentage maybe in order to account for that different time period, I guess. But you got to start with some time period where you know what the data is. By estimating, I think you might undermine. I worry that you would undermine the credibility of the goal ultimately.
Yeah,
Steve?
there must be dozens of cities that encounter this.
I know.
The mayor signed the U.S. Mayor's Agreement in 2007. I don't have the population numbers for Urbana in front of me, but my understanding was they were remarkably stable for the last 30 years. I don't think there's a huge leap. There's no law we're breaking by adopting a baseline. The meat of this is the 80% number, not the baseline number, I think, for all of those reasons. We can't be accused of not setting ambitious enough a goal.
In that case, if I yank out that last sentence above the highlighted material, at a future date, the SAC will need to approximate, et cetera, if I just yank that out, does anybody?
You might just say, at this time, there's no viable way or good way to determine the 1990 emissions. So at this point, we're sticking with 2007. That leaves it slightly open, but nearly as wide open as the prior wording.
From all the municipal climate action plans I've reviewed, nobody has data going back that far. The earliest ones I've seen data for are late 90s, early 2000s at best. I think that would be an exercise in futility to try and determine that. The other thing I kind of wanted to point out that maybe kind of supports this this discussion is the student volunteer that I've had this fall. He is finishing up the document that I've asked him to prepare, and that was basically, as you'll recall, looking at various municipal climate action plans from across the country and looking at the percentage that they were employing various types of greenhouse gas reduction strategies. So he's looked at these, and so, for example, commercial building energy efficiency, what percent did each plan employ that? So we might be able to get a better sense of the range at which those types of measures have been employed in other areas. And so I think what I'd like for him to do is maybe come to the January commission meeting and kind of present some of that information. And it's basically in a spreadsheet, and he can show that to us. And then afterward, I'll or maybe even beforehand, maybe be able to make that available to all of you so you can look at it. And so that, I think that'll help us kind of as we talk about these ideas that other communities have been here before and can share some of their knowledge. I think some of that information that he's gained can also help us as we look at the various strategies to employ and at what level are other communities employing them.
Steve?
Well, Mike, you may actually be going here next. Did you get an answer to the question about population growth and our BAU estimates from some of the other graphs?
No. Bart and I talked about that briefly right before that. Yeah, I mean, this really, I just got it to him. Well, you probably weren't waiting up late Sunday night to get it, so I assume you got it on Monday. So I think we'll have to wait for our next meeting for some of those answers.
Do our assumptions track the transportation numbers? The discussions of, I'm trying to remember. Was that where we had our population projection numbers come in?
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to our discussion, primarily from, I think, the July meeting and the August special work session that we had, where we were looking more at population projections and also looking at projected VMT, vehicle miles traveled, increases. That was kind of all wrapped up in the same discussion. And, I don't think any of that is really reflected in these charts here. So yeah, some of the data here really needs, I think, updated. And I think we have it all together. It just needs to be put out there, and I appreciate your offer to take a look at the spreadsheets and look at a way to graphically present that. So I'll try and compile all that information and get that to you so you can start playing around with that.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, I actually have a question for you. Did you, going back to page, under climate action principles on page 3, I know you had contacted Bart with an idea along those lines.
Correct.
Did you have specific language that you wanted for that?
I really appreciate whether it was you or somebody who took a stab at it based on my oral comments at the last meeting. This is very close to what I intended, and I think it's fine for now. I don't have fresh language with me tonight, but if upon review of this, if I have more detailed ideas, I'll get them to you, but I appreciate that. By the way, I was just talking about the vision statement number 3. The bullet under climate action principles is also fine. I was thinking, that bullet on equitable, yes.
Is that?
That's fine. Sorry, and you're right. It wasn't bullet number 3. It's the bullet that appears on the next page, supporting downtown developments, parks, amenities, and transportation infrastructure. That was a comment I had last month that got incorporated.
So you okay with both of those?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any other comments? Bart?
The section titled City GHG Reduction Efforts to Date, I want to give Kate some thanks for pulling together a lot of that updated information in the past month as far as city actions that have been taken over the last 3 years since that 2008 sustainability report to bring that information together. And I also want to thank Robert and Jeff and the others in community development that helped pull some of that information together as well. And I think we'll probably be coming up with some more of these little bullets as we continue on here. This is what we could pull together at this point in time, but I'm sure there's some others that are probably missing that will, as we continue to review this, kind of come up with some others that we can plug in there as well.
That's not included in here. Right, on page 10? No, yeah, page 10, bottom.
Yeah.
No? There's no, it's just T8s and T5s.
Yeah, I can certainly get that added in there.
And there, you mentioned bicycle master plan. There may be a pedestrian plan at some point. So I don't know if you want to put that in. Be at some point a pedestrian a pedestrian master plan or master whatever it's called.
Yeah, although I think in this section, we were just looking at accomplishments to date.
Oh, okay.
So.
I thought that's what you were going to be looking at. Okay. Yeah, that's right.
Anything else? Okay. So I've got a paragraph each coming from John and Steve for next time. We've got Todd's revised list coming hopefully within a week or so. And a few answers to a few of the questions from staff. I'm going to go out on a limb and say maybe we can get this wrapped up next meeting. Or at least get it to the point where, all we really need to do is just like dot the I's and cross the T's on a very final draft in February. And so maybe make that our goal, that we're going to wrap the substance of it up next meeting.
Actually end up recommending
The whole darn thing. I'm going to send it to council and say we recommend that you adopt this as a city document, as a city climate action plan. Looking a little doubtful there, John. What's up? Bart?
I think the piece that we're missing that we had talked about was a recommendation that we undertake a phase 2 process. So that is that in there? If so, I don't recall it.
It's
so.
implicit, but I'll make sure that it's explicitly stated.
That would be one of our recommendations, that we, this is our phase 1 report. We're detailing our emissions inventory, some things that have happened to date. We're establishing some principles that we'd like to base future planning on. We are also then recommending a phase 2 process that will look more in depth at some of these more complex emissions reduction issues that have seemed to bog us down so far in the planning process. So I think just making it clear what this report represents and what we're recommending for a continuation of that process.
Okay. Anything else tonight, John?
if we adopt this with Todd's list, are we going to have anything that indicates what percent of our goal will have reached 8 years from now?
Well, I believe the list actually attaches, it has percentages included in it based on the ICLEI data. And among the questions I have in here are, included ones with regard to if we get the clean renewables through municipal aggregation. We'll probably have to address at some level that the it would only be for as many years as we would be purchasing that kind of power on a citywide basis. So we'd have to put that caveat in there. But I think with that, yeah, we would also have some percentages attached to it.
I think probably what I can do to help address that is to rerun the ICLEI's CAPA software and throwing in some numbers for the numbers that we had ran the last time were throwing out some high projections of purchasing, I think, 50% of our energy with renewable energy credits and another 30% from other renewable energy sources, something like that, which seemed pretty pie in the sky before we started talking about aggregation. So I think going back and running those numbers maybe under a model where we get aggregation and we have 90% of the electric load being purchased with 100% or 90% of the electric load purchased with 50%, so we can kind of see where that projection falls, and then that'll, we can see, that CAPA software will then spit out what the total projection would be under those two or three scenarios.
Sorry, this popped right into my head. Is the CAPA smart enough to know then that if your grid looks a certain way, it's going to know that the washing machine strategy is going to rebalance based on that, basically? I just pull out another example, but I think it is, because I think it's because it for any given strategy, it knows what grid it's building from. So I mean, I think if you set the grid a certain way, that it won't assume that you're running your washing machines on coal at the same time that you've said we're buying 100% clean energy, that kind of thing. Anyway,
Right.
If
So
it can't do that, what can it do?
So we're gonna.
that's I think that's what it's designed
But
to
that's
do.
a good point. That we just want to be sure that we're not double reporting the same numbers. Yeah.
Coal-fired washing machine?
It's amazing.
That's why he's close out all that soot on them.
It's, it's fashionable, And
As I was reading through this, I kept thinking, wow, we've got to really reduce single occupant vehicles. We need more LED nights. We need a much more efficient transportation infrastructure. We need more roundabouts. Now, I just want to verify that those are the things that we don't want to put in here because they're too specific. And the fact that it made me think of all those things means that this document will be useful in moving us. Is that fair?
I thought some of those things weren't they in the in Todd's list?
I don't know. In the phase one.
I think our thought was in the phase one we would have other strategies in there, the ones that we had identified as being the low-hanging fruit, even though we didn't necessarily like that term, but the education on low-carbon lifestyles, some of those things that we identified that there was really no reason to wait to recommend them, other than maybe funding sources to help undertake those efforts. But the larger, more complex stuff was what was going to wait for the phase two, whereas the energy efficiencies and those things that were within reach now, that we were going to include those in the phase one.
Yeah, and I would say, well, roundabouts would have to wait, except that the city already has, kind of something underway with regard to trying to do that. But yeah, I mean, I would certainly think things like, carpooling and, those ones that are a little easier to implement with little cost. would certainly be included.
Where'd she come from? She on this commission?
All right, well, while we're all still talking to each other, is there anything else? Anything else for tonight on this?
Can I make an announcement?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, actually, with regard to this, or are we ready to move to announcements? Okay. All right. Going once, going twice, gone. Time for announcements.
Okay. This is just a pure announcement. The Prairie Research Institute, and the Illinois State Geological Survey, which is part of it, 2 weeks ago began implementation of a major carbon capture and sequestration project with ADM in Decatur, and that project's been underway for 3 years, but they just began injecting the carbon dioxide coming off of ADM's ethanol facility. And over 3 years, a total of 1 million tons of CO2 will be locked into geologic formation 7,000 feet underground. That's the equivalent of about 7 years of emissions at Abbott Power Plant, or looking at our numbers, about 2 years of Urbana's total emissions. So that's just as a demonstration project. So it's a substantial amount of CO2, but it's demonstrating a technology that most climate stabilization plans rely on carbon capture and sequestration to meet somewhere between 20 and 40% of the total CO2 reduced over a 50-year period. That technology is sometimes associated with clean coal, but it extends a lot further than that. In this case, it's with a biofuel facility. But anyway, it's substantial progress. It's the first of its kind in the U.S. and one of only 3 in the world. But again, the IPCC and others are talking about needing to have 100 such projects in place by the end of the decade, and so we're proud to be a part of it, and just wanted to report that.
All right. Any other announcements? Is there a motion to adjourn? Nobody wants to adjourn. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, we're done.